Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. The Great Plague of 2020 and its product, the Great Crash of 2020, are upon us. The National Basketball Association has canceled its entire season, so have Major League Soccer and the National Hockey League. Major League Baseball has postponed the start of the season. Disneyland, Disney World, and Universal Studios have shut down. Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Stanford, and Berkeley have canceled in-person classes and have gone, in the most cases, to internet teaching. Primary and high schools have closed in Maryland, Ohio, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Texas, Kentucky, Arizona, Colorado, and Michigan. South by Southwest, Coachella, and the Stagecoach Music Festivals have been canceled. Broadway theaters have shut down. And New York City, California, and President Trump have declared states of emergency. All because of a highly contagious illness called severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, otherwise known as the novel coronavirus, a virus that causes an illness called COVID-19. I give news reports once a week on 545 radio stations on coast to coast, the highest rated overnight talk radio show in North America. According to calculations I did for the show using raw data on infection and death rates in China and Italy, if the coronavirus continues to kill at its current pace, it could send 1.8 million of us Americans to our graves. That's 22 times as many as died of the conventional flu in the winter of 2017 to 2018, a very bad flu season. But we have three massive new weapons to ward off the flu. Weapons that the folks in the Athens of Socrates, when it was stricken with the plague, and the sufferers of the bubonic plague of 1348 to 1350 in the depths of the Middle Ages in Europe, did not have. Plagues travel by jumping from person to person, and they take advantage of the social nature of us human beings. Let us follow our preferences, and we will come together in crowds. Crowds in the agora of ancient Greece, crowds in the Forum of ancient Rome, crowds in the ancient Roman Colosseum, crowds in today's shopping malls, sports stadiums, theaters, movie multiplexes, coffee shops, cafes, restaurants, and conferences. Not to mention 3,000 of us at a time crowded into a cruise ship. Infectious bacteria and viruses love crowds. A good crowd excitedly rubbing its shoulders is like an all-you-can-eat buffet for the sight of sort of microorganisms that celebrate good times by making you and me sick, or for the sort of microorganisms that sometimes cap off a good orgy by killing us. The greatest plague of modern times was the Spanish flu of 1918, which killed between 17 million and 50 million people worldwide, depending on who's counting. World War I had just ended. This plague killed more people than World War I. Instead of crowding together in trenches making war, though, we now had the freedom to crowd together in civilian gatherings like theatrical spectacles and silent movies. If someone had ordered us to work from home in 1918, we would have thought he or she was insane. Yes, we could have hauled sheaves of paper home, and yes, a few of us, the really rich ones, would have had telephones, but the clumping together at conference tables or the one-on-one conversations with our colleagues that make a company or a bureaucracy tick would have come to a halt. What's more, the ratio of office workers to folks who actually made the goods that office workers helped distribute and sell was radically different. The office was still a relatively new invention in 1918. The technology that made the office possible had not been conceived until a mere 37 years earlier. In 1876, the telephone and the typewriter had been invented, but that still wasn't enough to inspire the invention of the office. The device that did the trick was birthed 22 years later in 1898. It was the file cabinet. The file cabinet was a radical breakthrough in data storage and data retrieval. Once there was a central file cabinet, it made sense that workers could be clustered where they could have access to it, not only to retrieve the work of others on, let's say, the sales contracts and invoices to a dry goods store in New Orleans or North Dakota, but also to add in the records of your newest dealings with that store. But in 1918, there were many folks at assembly lines and very few people managing those assembly lines. Most Nabisco workers, workers for the National Biscuit Company, were on the assembly lines that baked bread and cookies, not in the offices that made sure those treats got to grocery stores. Most Ford workers were bolting parts to cars, not doing the paperwork that distributed and sold those cars. You couldn't take your assembly line home with you and mass produce loaves of bread or put drivetrains on one Model T after another from your living room. All of that has changed. The percentage of white-collar workers in America has gone up dramatically. For example, the federal government in 1802, over 200 years ago, had a mere 3,905 employees. Today, it has 2 million. Most of those employees do what we call paperwork. That paper, as recently as 40 years ago, had to stay in a central file cabinet in a central place, and it weighed tons. But today, you can take your paperwork home in files on your laptop. Those files weigh nothing. Yes, your laptop weighs 3.5 pounds, and yes, the cord with its adapter weighs another pound, but you can access files that would literally weigh tons on your company's group networking site and on the cloud. In fact, you can do all of this from your laptop. And even more amazingly, you can do it from a 7-ounce slab of technology in your pocket, from your cell phone. More important, you can access your colleagues, your coworkers, your family, and your friends, even if those coworkers, family, and friends are 9,000 miles away. You can have meetings on Zoom or Skype. You can have one-on-one FaceTime on Skype, Facebook, Telegram, WhatsApp, or of all things, an app called FaceTime. Yes, you miss something important, your friend's body language, but you see her face and hear her voice. And you hear that voice in a rich high fidelity that gets across emotions as well as words. Then there's the fact of online community. Roughly 4 years ago, the people on my block of brownstones in Park Slope, Brooklyn, established a President Street Block Association Google group that communicates via email. Through that group's emails, we have all come to know each other in ways we never did before. And faced with the coronavirus, we are sharing information on how to take care of ourselves and offering to help each other in ways I have never previously seen. All this leads to another factor, one we talked about a minute ago. Like most creatures on the planet, including bacteria, we humans are social animals. If we feel needed by our fellow humans, our immune system works powerfully and our ability to think stays intact. But put us in isolation, and our own bodies begin to kill us off. In my book, The Lucifer Principle, a scientific expedition into the forces of history, I call the forces behind this interior decay apoptotic mechanisms, or self-destruct devices. What's an apoptotic mechanism? Every cell in your body is built with an internal suicide pill. That poison pill is a chemical program evolved to kill that cell off. Sounds strange in a world that is supposed to be dominated by survival instincts and selfish genes, doesn't it? But there it is. It's what biologists call a programmed cell death mechanism. And in my book, The Lucifer Principle, and my second book, Global Brain, I show how that self-destruction makes the society in which we are mere cells smart. But what sets this poison pill off? The sense that the cell is no longer needed. All of us social organisms, from bacteria on up, have our own poison pills. You can see them at work when you are paralyzed depression, when you freeze on a math exam and forget everything you've ever studied, when you meet a potential romantic partner, want to charm him or her, and are tongue-tied, or when you have a welcome hour or week of downtime, and your body doesn't celebrate your freedom. Instead, it gets a cold. None of these is a survival mechanism. Things get even worse if you have total isolation. I was stuck in a bedroom for 15 years with myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS. For 5 of those years, I was too weak to speak and too weak to have another person in the room with me. That sort of absolute isolation, that sort of solitary confinement, produces pains for which there are no words in the English language. It turns your emotional system into a torture chamber of a kind you've never imagined and that I can't even begin to describe. All of these are manifestations of our pre-programmed self-destruct mechanisms, our apoptotic devices. What turns these internal poison pills on the most? The feeling that you are not needed by your fellow human beings, the lack of hugs and rubs. So one of the great dangers of social distancing and working from home 102 years ago, in the days of the Spanish flu, would have been isolation and the feeling of no longer being needed, plus the fact that you simply could not have worked, and the even grimmer fact that your employer was likely to make you feel unneeded by firing you, laying you off, as we would say today. This is where the amazing new tools of our era have changed things utterly. We have the internet, the laptop, and the cell phone. We actually can work from home, and we can socialize, schmooze, and even romance each other to our heart's content. It's true that we can't rub shoulders and we can't touch each other. We can't get hugs and rubs. But hopefully, when the rubble of the financial collapse of 2020 and the 2020 coronavirus disappears, the hugs and rubs will be the next step in our technology. Then there's the bottom line. The social contact that cell phones and laptops provide us, even when we are working alone in our homes, can boost our immune system, improve our cognitive powers, and keep our self-destruct mechanisms at bay. Which means in this new era of working from home, the laptop, the internet, and the cell phone will be our secular saviors. And for the first time since the Industrial Revolution of 1760, we will actually be able to work from home, and we will be able to do our part to help keep what is left of an economy going. Which means that for the first time in human history, we will be able to slow the spread of a plague by holding ourselves up at home and not only still making a contribution, but socializing without getting within infecting distance. Through self-isolation, social distancing, and self-quarantine, the laptop, the internet, and the cell phone are enabling one of the greatest experiments in public health in history. This is Howard Bloom speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous, otherwise known as Howard Bloom. And now for that sneaky, persnickety, snappy, sneezy, sleazy, seditious little off button. I think I've got it.